Good evening friends, you are most welcome to Civil Affairs channel. Today we are going to discuss Social Anthropology by Maan IGNOU, mane004 Gender and Society, in which we will discuss biological essentialism and social constructivism. Let us begin the topic. Now that sex and gender had been differentiated, there were crucial questions that needed to be addressed. Was sex related to gender? If yes, then how? These questions have provoked a lot of debates within feminism. You will find that there are broadly two schools of thoughts. One school, the biological essentialist, believes that biological differences between the sexes are significant and that it is sex that becomes gender. In other words, they believe that gender expresses one's inner essential core. A person is socially a woman because she has a female body and is sexed female. To that extent, they believe that gender cannot be entirely split apart from sex or analyzed on its own terms. The other school, the social constructionist, believe that sex and biology is of little importance to the idea of gender. They believe that there is nothing innate about gender, that gender behaviors are learned in particular social environment. Let's examine this in more concrete terms. An essentialist is likely to argue that boys are likely to be competitive and aggressive because of their sexual makeup, that boys will be boys. A social constructionist would argue that it is not hormones, genitals, etc., which engender competitiveness and aggression, that boys are aggressive boys because society socialize them to be so. Thinking beyond essentialism and constructivism. For all their differences, the essentialist and the constructionist share some crucial commonalities. Both of them, for the most part, work with the idea of two genders. Both tease the question of gender but ignore the possibility of problematizing the idea of sex. Meanwhile, there have been researches that have shown that sex is a unstable a category as gender. How so? Most of us who have studied biology presume that females have XX chromosomes and males have XY chromosomes. Annie Fausto Sterling, in the book Myths of Gender, Biological Theories About Women and Men, explores the common sense. She reveals that we have far more complex chromosomal combinations: XY females, XX male, people with XXY chromosome with exosome or exochromosomes, and so on. In other words, if one were to take chromosomal profile, we would find that there are more than two sexes, and so we find that it is important to ask, are there only two sexes or two genders? How does gender related to sex? Furthermore, how do societies produce and regulate gender regimes? What are the effects of being gendered? Can we begin to imagine what it means to refuse the current gender system? Activity 3. The subordination of women can be seen as the product of relationship by which sex and gender are organized and produced. Gail Rubin. Consider what Rubin says about what, according to her, are the relationships by which sex and gender are organized and produced. How does this produce the subordination of women? As we move along to studying particular theories, it might be useful to keep these and similar questions alive in our mind. Theorizing gender, our next heading. Let's begin it. One of these places, or one of the places from where we can begin to examine the theorization of the sex or gender system, is the work of cultural anthropologist Gail Rubin. In her influential essay, The Traffic in Women, Notes on the Political Economy of Sex, she attempts to trace the socio-historical mechanism by which the sex or gender system is produced. Rubin contends that male dominance is caused not because of biological differences. Instead, she argues it is a result of the operation of kinship structure, and second, the institution of a sexual division of labor. Let us examine the first one and then the other. According to Rubin, kinship systems are observable and empirical forms of sex or gender system. 1975. She draws on the work of Claude Lévi-Strauss in order to make the argument that kinship gets forced primarily through the exchange of women among men. Such modes of exchange and allocation of women permit men to consolidate relation with various groups and thereby to accumulate power. In order for such exchanges to be effective, women and their sexuality have to be controlled. This brings us to what Rubin conceives as a chief element of the political economy of sex: the sexual division of labor. It is such a division of labor that creates differences between gender and subordination of women. According to Rubin, kinship patterns and the economics of sex and gender together weave complicated networks of dependency and desire between men and women. This configures heterosexuality and also leads to domestication of women. One of the critiques made against Rubin's argument about the political economy of sex or gender is that she fails to demonstrate how it relates to other forms of exchange. In other words, what are the interconnections between the exchange of women, sex or gender system, and exchange of goods and services economy? Marxist feminists and socialist feminists have done considerable work in tracing the relationship between these two systems. You will read about their theorization in the next unit. For now, we will use Rubin's widely influential work as a station through which we can move towards other theories of gender. We will first examine feminist critiques of psychoanalysis. Our next heading is psychoanalytical theories. Why should we engage seriously with psychoanalytical theories? There are several people who would brush these theories aside because they do not appear to contribute to our understanding of social processes and relations, and yet without appreciating how the social comes to be intertwined with the psychological, we will have only a very partial view of how relationships of gender become woven into the very fabric of ourselves. Without an account of how subjects experience and internalize social relationships, we cannot begin to explain the power of gender regimes, how they get perpetuated, confirmed, and resisted. To simply a rather complex field, we could posit two robust modes of feminist psychoanalytical thought at the risk of missing many nuances. Let us think of them as the American strand and the French strand. Undoubtedly, they share certain commonalities. They are both concerned with the internalization of the regimes of sex, gender, sexuality, with how this process begins in early childhood. Both tend to give primacy to the mother daughter relationship. However, there are also significant differences between these two strands. Feminist psychoanalytical thought in America. Much of the feminist engagement with psychoanalysis in the continent began with the controversies provoked by Sigmund Freud's works. Some early feminists like Kate Millett quarreled bitterly with his thought and condemned them as patriarchal. However, there have also been more positive feminist engagements with psychoanalysis. Such works primarily draw on Freud's assertion that psychoanalysis does not try to describe what a woman is, but set about inquiring how she comes into being. Freud, 1968. Among the first feminists who sought to uncover the possibilities of Freudian theories is Juliet Mitchell. Mitchell holds that Freud's theory shows that our psychoanalytical or psychological development is based on patriarchy rather than biology. Another theorist who conceded the crucial nature of the human unconscious is Dorothy Dinnerstein. She attempts to show how the relationships that man forges with women, nature and history are sourced from the sexual division of labor. Dinnerstein argues that the current organization of the family is not natural, neutral, or private. Another important theories who examines issues of mothering, child rearing, and its significance to gender relation is Nancy Codrow, and we shall examine her work in some little detail here. Nancy Codrow, 1978, concentrates on what she calls the reproduction of mothering. She begins with the psychoanalytical premise that the child forms ego, its sense of self, in reaction to the powerful figure of the mother. As an infant, even when it is unable to speak, it feels a storms of desire and dependence which it has no power to fulfill. These experiences are never really forgotten. They remain in the unconscious. It is these that impel our sexuality, our desire for others, and for fulfillment in relationships. However, Kodoro maintains that these processes are very different for the male and for the female child. In order to grow into a man, the male child must deny its infantile experiences. He has to deny his dependency on the mother in order to claim a rationality that controls and dominates. The female child, on the other hand, does not have to disavow her emotional interaction and connectedness in a similar manner. To Codrow, these formations are not caused by biology but by specific social expectations and modes of organizations. They are formed in and through social relations. Like Rubin, Codrow sees the family as a central element in the sex or gender system. She focuses particularly on the how only women mother and how they produce children with gendered psychological tendencies. Like Rubin, Codrow sees the family as a central element in the sex gender system. She focuses particularly on the how only women mother and how they produce children with gendered psychological tendencies, that is, they produce daughters who will go on to become mothers and sons who will remove themselves from affective caregiving relationships, concent- concentrating instead on public life. By showing us how the sex gender system comes to be constitutive of our core identities, feminist psychoanalytical theories like Codrow help us see something important. They help us to recognize that popular ideas about sex roles and social conditioning are simplistic. These ideas conceive of the sex gender regimes as simply existing out there and believe that these regimes will change simply by doing different course, changing roles, etc. They do not take into account the fact that these regimes become internalized in ourselves. A prominent criticism made against theories such as those of Codrow is that they assume that everyone shares a universal fate. The human unconscious appears to be unaffected by history and by specific political, economic, and social contexts, but surely this is not true. Surely the ideas, content, and contours of child rearing differ in different societies. Surely they vary across classes, races, and regions. Activity 4. A significant aspect of Cordro's work is her critique of individualism. She also critiques the idea of an independent, isolated self, which underpin notions of individualism. In place of what she sees as this masculine ideal, she puts forth the idea of a self that is inextricably interpersonal and rational. Cordro 1978. By glorifying the interpersonal and rational, such as women's mothering capacities, does Cordro's theory confine women into kinship and associational bonds? Does she assign women to weak and feminine modes of being individual? What do you think?